Have you ever noticed that the more you pay attention to time, the slower it seems to go? Are we there yet? The refrain on family vacations that drives parents nuts. Part of a new orientation is the appreciation of the fact that our time is not our own, meaning we share time with everything else on the planet. What we do with this shared time impacts everything around us. Time is the fuel in which we burn, to quote a line from Star Trek. How hot are you for a life that matters? How are you living the shared time? All of us living inside the time given to us by our Creator, the very source of time, is the question. How are we spending our time? How are you living inside shared time? There's a difference, you see, between quantity time and quality time. I remember visiting an older man in his 90s in my job to do an assessment of his living situation. I had a task to do. I had a checklist of how to help him. But he kept getting off track, talking about stuff in his life, his family, his pain, his past. And in that moment, I worked through the checklist. I was working through the checklist. And I realized that the most important thing in that moment of time was not the checklist, although I still got through it. The most important thing in that moment, the moment we were both sharing, was to listen to an anxious, lonely man. Or as Christ would remind us, a new commandment that I give you, that you love one another. See, there is no better use of shared time than this. And so today we're going to look at how are we to be good stewards of the past. Now that may sound strange. How can we be stewards of something that is gone? The past is gone. Well, the past is not gone. You carry the past with you wherever you go. The past is like a suitcase. And wherever you go on the journey, you take with you everything you have accumulated in the past. I am a product of the past. The way I was raised, who raised me, the values that culture shared, the experience I have had in life has helped form who I am today. I love golf. I love the outdoors. I also don't like to show my emotions. Somehow my culture tells me that that's not very manly. That's all part of my past. The Apostle Paul tells us about his suitcase. Even though I too have reason for confidence in the flesh, if anyone else has reason for confidence in the flesh, I have more. Circumcised on the 8th day, a member of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew born of Hebrews, as to the law a Pharisee, as to zeal a persecutor of the church, as to righteousness under the law blameless. If Paul had been born a Gentile, he would have a suitcase filled with different stuff. He would not be the person we know as the Apostle Paul. All of us have a past we carry with us in the moment. How are we to be good stewards of that inheritance? Now, on the one hand, the past is our problem. It's for good reason that psychologists refer to our ongoing problems as baggage. Our unforgiveness is a form of baggage. Our anger is a form of baggage. Our bad habits are a form of baggage. Our shame is a form of baggage. Our need to be in control is a form of baggage. Our need to be liked by everybody is a form of baggage. Our critical nature is a form of baggage. And this baggage got packed somewhere in the past. And now we're living out of that suitcase in the space of the shared time we have with all things. See, we're all carrying an invisible suitcase on the inside called baggage. Only it's not so invisible. People's behaviors, people's patterns, people's problems, people's prejudices and faults are rooted in something. It came from somewhere. See, I used to be very anxious around authority figures because I had bad experiences with authority figures. And when I got around authority figures, they could see my anxiety. It was written all over my body language. You see, I see your suitcase. You see mine. If someone bought a Reuben sandwich a month ago and forgot about it, the rest of us could smell the sandwich coming from the suitcase, even if we couldn't see it. Paul had a lot of baggage as a very devout religious person. Very devout religious people can make life miserable for those around them, if they are unaware of the rotten parts of the faith they carry with them. Paul was one of these, so filled with indignation, so patriotic about his religion and his nation. See, he saw himself as the religious police of his day, throwing the followers of Jesus into prison. And all that came from somewhere. It was part of his suitcase filled with baggage. Now, some of you don't go to church because you experience the baggage of those inside the church. You can smell it. But all of us, religious or not, carry some baggage. And this is the problem we inherit from the past. But on the other hand, the past contains some answers. What we love about life also came from somewhere. The good things about us came from somewhere, nurtured by the past. I feel a profound connection with nature because I spent so much time in it as a rural country boy. My dad took me fishing, and I enjoy a good pasty, which is a UP dish. If you are a Youper, you know what that is. And my first instinct being raised in a rural culture is to lend a helping hand, because that was part of the culture. Now, someone was responsible for introducing me to those loves. Much of that is what is good about me is a reflection of what is good about where I came from. Where did the Apostle Paul learn to love Scripture? From his heritage. Where did Paul get his passion for God? From his Jewish faith. And God would use all of that as part of the answer that Paul would offer to both Jews and Gentiles. And so today, the lesson on stewardship of the past is this. As good stewards, we must unpack the past. That's it. As good stewards, we must unpack the past. In the light of this conversion to Jesus, Paul began to unpack how the past had skewed his understanding. He was wrong about many things, but he could also see how wonderful it was that God had given him such a heritage. We must also be willing to unpack our own personal past if we are to both appreciate it and be free of it. If you are critical, why is that? Where did it come from? Now, don't say that's just the way I am. People might have a personality bent, but life only adds fuel to the fire. If you are apathetic, why? If you are a control freak, why? So here's my favorite knock-knock joke. Okay, ready? Knock-knock. Who's there? Control freak. Now wait. Now you say control freak who? I love that. If you're easily upset, why? If you have an addiction, why? If you can't say no, why? If you feel guilty all the time, why? If your religion or your belief system makes you look down, or on people of a different color or different belief systems or whatever. You see, the problems we have today were birthed somewhere in the past, and they got added to your suitcase. A troubled kid almost always means a troubled home. Well, now, we all come from a troubled home. It's just a matter of degrees. Some of us were raised with less troubled homes than others. And nobody comes from a perfect past. Nobody has a perfect country or a perfect culture or a perfect theology. And we all have inherited good and bad from our parents, from our community, from our country, and from our faith. But in spite of all that, there's so much good we inherited from the past. It is this good stuff we want to build upon as we move past our past. The past does help. It does contain some answers. And so as we unpack the past, we discover what is slowing us down. Paul could now see his Jewish baggage, how it had been slowing him down. In fact, one day he confronted the Apostle Peter for allowing his Jewish baggage to slow him down. Peter had been taught his whole life not to eat with Gentiles, but that was beginning to change, but not for everyone. And so one day Peter refused to eat with Gentiles in the presence of those stuck in an overly dogmatic, prejudiced past. It would be like a white man eating with blacks before segregation was outlawed, right? And Paul confronted Peter's past because it wasn't consistent with the message of Christ. I was talking with someone a while back, and they were burnt out from serving God. And I asked why, and they said, well, because they were told the best way to be happy is to put the needs of others ahead of their own needs. And I said, really? The Bible teaches that? Or is that just a way for you not to have to feel sad? Stay busy so you don't have to face the stuff in your suitcase. And time does not heal old wounds. Time by itself does not heal old wounds. Time can cover it up, like a scab, but it doesn't necessarily heal it. It's when we get perspective on that old wound, when we see how it's slowing us down, right, that we uncover it, that it begins to heal. The unexamined baggage slows down our potential, and it contaminates the shared time we share with others. This is why it must be unpacked. But we also discover something else. We discover the gifts of God. See, Jesus is not just our Savior. He can also be our healer. What if Paul couldn't have been able to receive the forgiveness of Jesus because of what he had done to Christians? A hatred, by the way, fueled by his distorted religion. By the way, if your faith causes you to hate anybody, you got the wrong faith. I mean, what if he had allowed himself to be eaten up by a private guilt? He would never have become the great apostle. He would have been the great disappointment to himself. There is a form of healing prayer that I do with people willing to unpack the past. The stuff in the suitcase is kept out of sight for a reason. It's painful to look at. But when we stick with it, and we allow Christ to enter into it with grace and compassion and truth, we experience a level of freedom, and the suitcase isn't so heavy anymore. Psychologists have discovered that if people only look at the bad that's happened to them, it is not enough. They can get stuck. They also need to appreciate the good. In fact, appreciating the good is an essential part of moving beyond the baggage. Because the past we inherit is always, always a mixed blessing. Now, some of you may feel like opening the suitcase would be to dishonor someone. Dishonor those who raised you. Dishonor the church or the country or the flag or whatever. It's not a question of dishonor. It's simply a statement of truth. It is what it is. And there's good stuff we have inherited and not such good stuff. And we thank God for the good stuff and we work on the bad stuff. See, I don't see why we can't believe Black Lives Matter and be supportive of the police. Why we can't kneel during the national anthem and be a good American. There's a lot of good stuff about this country and a lot of terrible things, both in the past and right now. Healing happens not by pretending it was all good, by burying it, but neither does it happen by not seeing the good. It is not either or, but both and. I live with the blessing and the curse of being an imperfect human being created in the image of God. That is all of us. Your parents were a mixed blessing. Your community is a mixed blessing. Your church is a mixed blessing. Your friends are a mixed blessing. The police are a mixed blessing. Your country is a mixed blessing. We need to come to terms with this. Buried within those mixed blessings, we discover the gifts of God. And so no matter how good or bad your past is, God is seeking to redeem it. Paul's past did not disqualify him. Killing the followers of Jesus did not disqualify him. Being a Pharisee did not disqualify him. There's a line in the movie Unforgiven where a young man kills another man, and he's feeling the horror of it. And he says to Clint Eastwood's character, "Well, I guess he had it coming." And Clint responds back, "We all got it coming, kid." God looks at us mixed up people, and he seeks to redeem our story. He wants us to turn the suitcase over to him. And as we do that, we see that we are not disqualified. We are forgiven, and we are healed. But more than that, we're called. God takes the ashes of the past, and he uses that to make something beautiful. But we must first appreciate how the bad stuff is impacting how I am with others. Until we see it, we'll be controlled by it. Norm was a man who came to a Bible study I led in Chicago. And Norm was very needy, but he couldn't see it. And all he knew was how needy he was. And everyone else could feel it. And so the harder he tried, the more people ran. And the more people ran, the more needy he became. And I remember working with Norm, opening his eyes to his neediness, because I was God's instrument for redemption for Norm. And he began to relax a little, and the relationships he craved began to open up. So, no matter how good or bad your past is, God is seeking to redeem it. So he redeems the bad by healing some of it. Jesus really is interested in healing some of the baggage in the suitcase. He wants to lighten us up so we can serve and love and live. And he does this through disorientation. He shows us the stuff in the suitcase that is slowing us down. Normally it's the thing we don't want to admit about ourselves, or the thing that others are telling us that we are defensive about. What in your life needs healing today? Wherever you go, there you are. What is unresolved in the past spills over into the present. You carry it with you, your attitude, your anger, your compulsions, your prejudice. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to heal all of it. Nobody gets perfect in this life. Sometimes that thorn in the flesh serves a larger purpose. But even then, it's all grace. See, we don't have to live out of the wounds of our past. He redeems the bad by healing some of it. And then God redeems the bad as we learn from it. You can't unpack someone else's suitcase. If you don't know how to work the zippers on your own suitcase, the more we understand our own hearts, the good, the bad, and the ugly, the more equipped we are in matters of the heart. The more we understand the grace and mercy and truth of Christ for ourselves, the more equipped we are to help others. The best thing you can do for others is a sanctification, which is a big word for unpacking your suitcase and getting free of it. The best thing you can do for others is the sanctification of your own soul. We can only offer others what we have received. Paul is the ambassador of grace. He is the apostle of grace because he has experienced grace for himself. A man bound up with rules and regulations and hatred and spiritual pride and bigotry is able to lead others to a fuller appreciation of their humanity because Jesus had unpacked him. Jesus is not primarily interested in you not feeling bad. Go back. The Christ is not primarily interested in you not feeling bad, at least not at first. He is primarily interested in you growing beyond the wounds you carry. And this may mean exposing the wound to dig out the infection, so that you might experience healing and freedom and the joy of being a person, of being the person you were created to be. Our past is redeemed as we learn from it. And as our past is redeemed, we see the good, and it makes the good even more precious. See, my suitcase represents my own sacred journey. It is literally the time of my life. And I can look back and I can see the good, the fingerprints of God on my life. I can see the good of where I came from, and I can see how He has been using even the bad stuff to make a difference in the lives of people as I learned the lessons they could teach me. And so it's all sacred to me, the good and the bad. Paul was blind before he was converted. He thought his suitcase was perfect. He was blameless after all. But ironically, the sheer light of Christ reveals just how blind he was. God lets him live inside that blindness until he's ready to see the limitations and the opportunities of his past. And when that happens, Paul becomes an apostle, which means a sent one. God is doing the same thing with us if we have the eyes to see. How are you living inside the time you share with everyone and everything on the planet? If some of that time is not spent reflecting on the impact of the past on who you are, in terms of how you treat yourself, how you treat others, how you see others, then you're not using shared time wisely. You are being controlled by your past. But if you can identify the good and the bad, you have the self-awareness to live inside the time you were created to live within. So here's the question. What's in your suitcase? May we all have enough self-awareness about the past to not be controlled by it. May we find the courage to look inside the past, appreciate the past, but not live out of the past. Amen. Grace and peace to you.